Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian. And there is something very important we need to do as soon as possible.
Podcast.
Fuck!
Oh, I thought you were going to say podcast.
Yeah, it would have been fun if you did.
It's the most action any of us are getting lately.
Yeah, it's really hot and heavy podcasting going on here on Awesome Movie Year.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's happening right now. We are in the midst of our special 20th retrospective season. And the whole deal here was we did our draft episode. We picked various years from previous seasons and made our choices for movies that we each wanted to talk about. And then Jason, in his interest in Christmas movies, picked a couple of other years that we had not drafted and came up with some holiday-themed choices for us. And we are starting Christmas. I believe this is coming out on Christmas Day. So if you're unwrapping your presents, you can unwrap the episode on Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, the holliest, jolliest movie that you can come up with. And from 1999.
Nothing gets you into the Christmas spirit more than Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, yes, indeed. But I mean, this movie is like suffused with Christmas. I think, Jason, I know you like talking about movies that are not Christmas movies, but like have Christmas in them. Like at one point in the movie, it's Christmas and the characters celebrate Christmas, but that's not this. Like Christmas is going on throughout this film. The Tom Cruise, he travels all around New York City, and everywhere he goes, there's Christmas decorations and lights, and you never forget that it's Christmas time in this movie.
Well, I think that was just an accident. It's not really something Kubrick planned, right?
No, of course it's something he planned. Okay, you're being... It's like, wait a minute. What are you talking about?
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for picking up on the sarcasm there.
Right.
As if Kubrick never planned anything in his films.
Yes, he certainly did that, because I was thinking, I was like, no, they couldn't have. It's not like they shot it in New York City at Christmas time. They built every little thing that exists in this movie from scratch, including all the Christmas decorations.
I mean, as you know, Josh, this is based on Arthur Schnitzler's novella Traum Novelle, Dream Story, and in his it was more of like a carnival time at Vienna. So Kubrick set this setting more in modern times in New York at Christmas. So yes, of course, Josh, this was all pre-planned.
Yes,
this is terrible podcasting, by the way. Hey, Kubrick planned to do this at Christmas. Thank you for that.
We are planning our podcast as meticulously as Stanley Kubrick plans his films. Well, I think also, right, we see all the Christmas lights all the time, right? The decorations, especially the lights. And like we talked about in our episode on Barry Lyndon, the Kubrick film where he shot with all this candlelight because of the time period, I think in a way, Christmas lights serve the same purpose in this film that candles serve in Barry Lyndon, right? He uses it as the lighting in many of the scenes.
I was going to bring up lighting beyond that because there's so many scenes with like blue hues in the background. And obviously there's a reason for that because there's a reason for everything. Did you pick up any, what's the symbolism of the blue, Josh?
Yeah, I don't know. It is very strange. Like anytime a character is inside, and of course, again, these are all sound stages. So they're putting some sort of blue filtered light, the light that comes in, that shines in through the windows at all times, basically anywhere when someone is inside and there's a window where you can see light is blue. And I don't know what the symbolism of that is. I mean, Tom Cruise's character he's blue. He's a little down. That seems kind of basic. I don't know if that's what it is.
Well, the lights, Christmas, unwrapping a marriage, unwrapping presents. I'm not. Okay, bye.
Yeah. So this movie was Stanley Kubrick's final film. He died 6 days after turning in what is supposedly his final cut, although there is some dispute over whether he was actually truly finished with the film. But the final cut that was eventually released, of course, because he wasn't around to fiddle with it anymore, the cut that he turned into Warner Brothers and showed to Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman to get their kind of approval is the cut that was released. And he passed away 6 days after that, unexpectedly. It is, though, his highest grossing film, grossing $162.1 million on its budget of $65 million. Holds the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous film shoot at 400 days. And I think that's not even the entire shoot. That's the continuous portion. But I think they're
46 weeks.
Yeah, they shot at other times non-continuously for over a year. And it's amazing because, like, this isn't a big spectacle action movie. I mean, this is pretty much, I mean, other than the central orgy scene that obviously involves a lot of people and a lot of logistics, almost all of this movie otherwise is just kind of people talking in rooms. So the idea that Kubrick spent this much time just doing the same things over and over and over again, right? Stories about people doing 95 takes of walking through a door or whatever is amazing. And from my perspective, I'm not sure to the benefit of this film necessarily.
I would agree with that. There's the idea of, Kubrick's trying to break down the actors so he can rebuild them, right? We hear this with Fincher and Oliver Stone and stuff like that. But, like one of the things, Harvey Keitel was originally cast, I think, as the Sidney Pollack role, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, as the Sidney Pollack character.
He left because he thought he was being disrespected because he had to do so many takes of walking through a door.
Right. And I mean, it's crazy that you read that. And then later, or at least I saw later in, the Wikipedia facts or whatever, mentioning Tom Cruise doing 95 takes of walking through a door. So walking through doors in this movie must be a very important thing that Kubrick wants to get right.
And Josh, as we know from our Tom Cruise discussions, that's got to be so frustrating for him just walking.
Right. No running through doors or anywhere here in this.
Do you think he was like, come on, Stanley, give me one or two where I can run?
Yeah, exactly. So, right. I mean, it's interesting watching this. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were at this time a married couple. And that was the reason that they were, or a part of the reason that they were recruited to star in this movie about kind of the breakdown and rebuilding of a marriage. I guess at one point, Kubrick was considering casting Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger, who were also a married couple at the time. So seemingly that was an important aspect to the casting for him. But yeah, nowadays we don't think of Cruise in these kinds of serious layered roles per se, right? He just runs and jumps and fights and falls out of buildings and stuff. So
and how I feel about that. I think he's so talented. I think that's a bummer. And we're starting to get back to the point where he's going to take more risks. But I think you could say the same thing in Nicole Kidman. Like, this was really like kind of the apex ascent of her, this in the next few years. And now she's like a meme and also just juicy limited series lady, right? I'd like to get her more.
Right. Although even those limited series, if they're a little trashy, I think those roles offer more emotional layers than like Mission Impossible and Top Gun.
I think you're underestimating Tom Cruise's ability to make it look so easy. I think there's more to it than that.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not saying that those big action stunts are easy, but in terms of the emotional layers of the role as an actor, I think there's much less going on there.
You might be right, but at the same time, I don't think Top Gun Maverick would have connected if there weren't so many like emotional resonant points. But we did this on our year-end episode where Dave and I ranked it number one, and you sat there like a little baby not getting his Christmas pudding on Christmas morning.
I think Top Gun Maverick is fine, but we're talking about Eyes Wide Shut here. The other really notorious thing about this film, of the sexual explicitness of it, the nudity, and unfortunately, in order to get an R rating, they were required to add in some digital figures in the central orgy scene, bodies, people kind of standing in front of the people having sex in order to obscure them. And that was a huge controversy at the time. And now you can watch the unrated version, although I'm not sure. I was watching it. I watched it on Paramount Plus. I don't know if we all just streamed it. But I was watching that scene, and I think it's still the altered version. I think you have to get it like on Blu-ray in order to get the uncut version.
I think you're right. I mean, the digital effects don't look bad per se, but it's just the idea of censoring Stanley Kubrick in some type of way. Like, this made any difference at all? Like, oh, we only saw this much sex and not this much sex. It's stupid and idiotic. And again, the MPAA can go shove its head up its own ass. Give me an R rating for that.
Yeah, they would. Right. It's 65 seconds, I think, of a sequence that has those added elements to it. And one of the issues with the people disputing over, is this the movie that Kubrick actually would have signed off on, is would he ever have agreed to that? And some people saying, well, yes, because he had agreed to turn in an R-rated movie, and other people saying that he would not have. And of course, we can't know for sure. But it does seem like not a compromise that he would have been happy about.
Yeah, you had mentioned that the screening he showed it to Cruise and Kidman and the Warner Brothers execs, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking, if Kubrick's alive today, they give him a 3-theater release and then bury the movie and then just say it was a Max original and, fuck him, even though he's a legend. It's his juror number 2. Like, so stupid, man. Let these guys go.
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing here is, again, despite all the controversy, and this movie, whether you enjoy it or not, is certainly a challenging film. It's very long, it's very serious, it's slow. And so the fact that it made that much money at all is kind of astounding. It was not, I was surprised it wasn't a big awards thing. It did get a Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Score, but that was the only nomination it got there. It did not get any Oscar nominations and some other minor awards. But I would have thought, even if the response was a little mixed, that just Kubrick and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman being such huge stars would have given it some momentum there at the Oscars, but that was not the case.
Well, as we know from past discussions, the Oscars never treated Kubrick well, right? Like, he's never had an Oscar and everything like that. So,
right. But by the time, I think what happens with a lot of filmmakers like
right,
that,
they get their lifetime achievement award.
Right, exactly. And that by the time this, even though, people didn't necessarily know that he was going to die, but certainly he'd been this acclaimed figure and he'd had enough time for his films to have entered the canon, right? Even if at the time if the initial release, they received mixed response. And I think that happens a lot, that eventually by later in their careers, the Oscars come around. And I would have thought maybe, especially because by the time the Oscar nominations came out, he was gone, and it would have been a way to sort of honor him, but apparently not.
So that year, we've talked about 99 before that. That was the year Sam Mendes won for American Beauty, which kind of took over the world. Lasse Hallström was up for The Cider House Rules. That's a fun movie. Spike Jonze, not fun, that's not the right word for that. Spike Jonze being John Malkovich definitely should have been in there. Michael Mann, The Insider, that's who I would have voted for. That movie is incredible, and that's so good. And then Shyamalan for The Sixth Sense. So I guess you're taking out Lasse Hallström there, or who are you taking out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I personally don't really like this movie, so I wouldn't take out any of them. But yeah, I mean, if we were going to add Kubrick in, sure. I haven't seen The Cider House Rules in a long time, but I don't recall it being anything special, really.
Good night, you kings of Maine, you princes of New England.
Other than that, which I knew was coming.
And I do like this movie, but I think it's lesser than some of his other efforts, and I would not have put him in for Best Director here either. So
right. I mean, my feeling on that is less about this is such a great movie that it has been robbed of awards, but rather just the response to Kubrick because of how big a deal he was. And I think the critical response to this shows that. It was interesting to me. I'm always trying to find, if it comes during this period, I'm always looking to see the Siskel and Ebert or Ebert and whoever segment to see what they said about it. And looking this up, Ebert, who at the time was having like rotating guest critics after Siskel had died, he did a whole episode just about this movie and Stanley Kubrick. And because it was sort of a tribute to Kubrick, but it was also about this movie. I mean, it was their review of this movie, and he had 4 other critics on as his sort of round table of guests, other Chicago-based critics. And they spent the entire episode talking about this movie and about Kubrick's work in general. So, I mean, that's how major Kubrick was and this movie was. So, and they gave it 5 thumbs up. So that's the most thumbs I think any movie has ever gotten.
And if you were in the orgy scene, you'd know exactly where to put those thumbs.
Oh, yeah, you were waiting for that one.
I was not. How would I know you were going to say 5 thumbs up?
Well, you knew there might be some thumbs going up somewhere.
You know, you don't credit me enough. You think I pre-planned this, Josh? This is the goal that comes when we record. So
I don't mean to besmirch your improvisatory abilities. So congratulations
but I think,
on that.
Thank you. I think really, Cruise, obviously biggest movie star in the world, him and Russell Crowe at this time. But I really think Nicole Kidman, in the next few years, we get Moulin Rouge and then she wins for The Hours. And I think this is really like her apex as a movie star.
I mean, as a movie star, I don't know. I'm sure she did much more accessible, popular film.
Not this movie, this time period, dude.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I that's fair, right? As you said right now, I mean, she's still extremely famous, but she does spend more time in those limited series now rather than as like Tom Cruise as the lead of some massive blockbuster film. That's just not really what she does.
You couldn't bank on $100 million Nicole Kidman movie right now. And that's not a knock on her. That's more of a where the industry's at.
Right. So Dream Story also had been adapted 3 previous times into films, but all kind of low budget films in Europe in 1969, 1983, and 1989, but not films that people probably would have been familiar with then or now. I looked those all up on Letterboxd and all of them have like under 100 views on there, and none of them are streaming readily at the moment. So not something where people would have viewed this as a remake per se. And it's not a book that people are super familiar with, even though the book would have been accessible to people. I certainly have not read it. And I assume, Jason, that you did not read Dream Story.
No, but I mean, you didn't read it because you hate Viennese modernism. So that's
one of my big pet peeves right there.
So I just haven't gotten around to it. It's on the list there, Josh. It's on the
So I mean, this was a big moment critic wise, and it did make a lot of money, but not surprisingly, it got a D- cinema score from the audience polling service. So everyday people who went out the opening night to see this movie, who were maybe excited because of big stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, or just because they'd heard maybe that this was a controversial film or that it would be sexy or whatever, very disappointed, those people. And I can imagine that being the case. I mean, even if you went to see this movie because you thought it was going to be erotic or sexy, like despite all the nudity and sex in this movie, it's not arousing really in any way. It's kind of anti-arousing in a way.
Yeah, the weird thing to me is you always bring up that cinema score is the people who seek the movie out, right?
Right.
So you figure it's like Kubrick heads, Kubrick fans, right? So that's what's so strange. I feel like they just wouldn't know what they're getting into if they're giving it a D-. I agree with you. It's not an erotic movie, but that was in no way the reason, when this came out where I was like, oh, it's going to be erotic. It was like, no, it's Kubrick's last movie. And it's, all the pomp and circumstance that you mentioned about the shoot and their marriage and all this and that. You see it because it's a Kubrick movie and it's got 2 of the biggest stars in the world, not because ooh, it's going to be sexy. I really want to see Tom Cruise in a sex scene or something like that. So.
Well, I think people did go see it for that. Maybe you and I didn't, and maybe not everyone did. But I mean, on the one hand, I think you're right that all the people who were really into Stanley Kubrick would have been out on opening night to go see it right away. But I think there was such hype, like you were saying about the shoot and the relationship between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, that probably a lot of people who didn't know or care about Stanley Kubrick did go see it right away because of that star power, because of its reputation for being, filled with sex or whatever. So, I mean, that D- is an average of all the scores, and maybe there were a bunch of Kubrick fans who gave it an A, but they were definitely drowned out by the other kinds of people. I can't imagine if you love Stanley Kubrick and went to see this on opening night and even found it disappointing that you would give it that low a rating.
Yeah, those people who gave it a D- should go suck on D's nuts. Ha ha.
Man, I
D's.
revoke my praise for your improv abilities.
Some
So-
double D's in the orgy scene, right? Right, guys?
Yeah, there is
D
that
boobies.
going on there. It's a D plus scene. I don't know.
Ayo.
So critics
Rolling,
generally were
guys.
positive. As I said, Roger Ebert spent a whole episode along with Jonathan Rosenbaum, Ray Pride, Michael Wilmington, and Dan Geyer talking about this film, and they were all generally quite positive. Thumbs up from everyone. Although they don't specifically say, they just say that they're positive. I think Ebert wanted to reserve the thumbs for himself. But they do all...
That's erotic.
That is, yes. And in his written review, Roger Ebert said, "The film has the structure of a thriller, with the possibility that conspiracies and murders have taken place. It also resembles a nightmare. A series of strange characters drift in and out of focus, puzzling the hero with unexplained details of their lives. Kubrick pays special attention to each individual scene. He makes a deliberate choice, I think, not to roll them together into an ongoing story, but to make each one a destination, to give each encounter the intensity of a dream in which this moment is clear, but it's hard to remember where we've come from or guess what comes next. The reconciliation at the end of the film is the one scene that doesn't work. A film that intrigues us because of its loose ends shouldn't try to tidy up."
Yeah, I didn't mind the ending at all. I was actually thinking the opposite. I get the loose end stuff, but I was like, what if they had leaned more into like Cruise's paranoia and the thriller aspect? And is is someone dead? And at the same time, his marriage is unraveling overnight. I'm like, there's some meat left on the bone there, but I don't know. Then it's a 7-hour movie. So, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's meant to be really a suspense thriller. I mean, I think the scene where Sidney Pollack's character kind of says, "Hey, guess what? This was all staged for your benefit." And Bill, Tom Cruise's character, kind of buys into that. And then he's like, "Wait a minute. No, that's not right." I think we're meant to assume from that scene, like, maybe it was staged, maybe it wasn't, but like, it doesn't matter. This isn't a mystery, right? This isn't a film where you want to put all the pieces together and arrive at a solution, right? It's not an Agatha Christie story, right? I think the idea is maybe all of this was a dream in a way, right? What is the name of the book?
Right.
Is Dream Story. All of this could simply, and there's a lot of discussion of dreams, what Nicole Kidman's character dreams about being with that officer, and just the idea of fantasies, that's what sends Bill on this tailspin, is not even that his wife actually did anything, but that she just thought about it. So I think the dreamlike nature of it is important, and it's not something we're meant to solve.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because I thought while watching this of Mulholland Drive, and I think, what if David Lynch had this material, right? That would have been pretty interesting. And this is not as surreal as what he would do with it, but there's definitely some connective tissue there.
Mm-hmm.
So Manohla Dargis in the New York Times said, "As a literally spellbinding addition to the Kubrick canon, Eyes Wide Shut would have been greeted with the same fascination had its director not died 4 days after completing it. And it would go on to rattle audiences in the same quietly devastating way. In what is truly the riskiest film of his career, the man who could create a whole new universe with each undertaking chose the bedroom as the last frontier, to the point where prolonged conjugal conversations mark the dramatic high points in a long, winding, and surreal story. Often accused of creating icy characters, he touched the hidden part of the iceberg this time."
Do you think it's the riskiest movie of his career? I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, obviously, especially in the later part of his career, every movie seemed like it was a risk. I mean, we could argue that, look, as you were pointing out earlier, right? Look at the response from the MPAA, where if you make a movie full of horrific violence, you can usually skate by with your R rating, but you put a little bit of sex in it and you end up with this controversy. So taking on sex so directly is risky for any film, for any filmmaker. But I mean, risky in a commercial sense or whatever. We talked about Barry Lyndon. in a previous episode, and that movie is very risky in terms of being kind of esoteric and inaccessible, and but also extremely expensive, and thus having to reach a large audience in order to succeed, and it did not. So you could argue that that's just as risky, I think.
I mean, as we know, standards and culture changes over time. I think today this would get a green light remake much faster than Lolita would.
Well, yes, that's true. Yeah, Lolita, the subject matter there is riskier. I can't imagine anyone being able to remake Lolita right now. But I think if you made this movie right now and you intended to release it in theaters, you would meet the same kind of obstacles with getting your rating.
I thought about this while watching it because I think we're desensitized. Obviously this was 99, so we're still using dial-up AOL and everything like that. But porn and sex is so readily available everywhere. Like, that orgy scene was much more shocking then. Now it was just like an average Friday night, baby.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's true. But on the other hand, again, I feel like those standards are still in place, that despite all that, if you submitted this movie to the MPAA now, they would not give it an R rating without those cuts. I think that's still the standard that's in place.
Yeah, they're morons. You're right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So not every critic loved it. Owen Gleiberman in Entertainment Weekly was disappointed. He said, "Eyes Wide Shut, a mystery that intertwines lust, fear, and death, wants to show the temptations of the everyday transformed into a whirlpool of fantasy. It aims to lull the audience into a hypnotic dream state. Yet what we see instead is a vague, fragmentary mishmash of ominousness and cheap thrills, Red Shoe Diaries with metaphysical pretensions. I have always been an ardent Kubrick fanatic, but Eyes Wide Shut, a movie that views sexuality not as experience but as ritual, has an oddly formal, closed-off quality, like a dream that has already been analyzed on a shrink's couch. Stanley Kubrick was a genius, but by the time he died, he'd observed a generation's worth of cultural change from within his self-imposed bunker, and the remove shows. It's his eyes, I'm afraid, that seem to have been wide shut, and his movie that wears a mask."
Gleiberman, a Jew hating a Christmas movie. Shame on
that
you,
was made
Jews.
by a Jew, so
and we're Jews, so that's why
yes, we are.
About this. It's fair that it is inaccessible, but I think when we weren't alive, but if you saw 2001 and like when it came out, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's the most crowd pleasing, widest birth of an audience ever. That this is working towards. That's who he is as a filmmaker. He just does his thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's saying that it's inaccessible exactly, but that it doesn't engage really with what it's theoretically about. I mean, I thought it was an interesting contrast because Manohla Dargis is saying he's known Kubrick for this aloofness, for this remove, and he has moved past that in this film. And Gleiberman is arguing the opposite. And I would agree with Gleiberman that this movie feels like a movie about sex made by someone who perhaps has not had sex in many decades. And that's okay, right? That's Kubrick's perspective. But nothing in this movie to me feels authentic, right? Lots is made of the idea that Kubrick meticulously rebuilt New York City on these sets or whatever. And that to me was more convincing than like literally any interaction between human beings in this film.
Do you think that's because of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, where it was a sham marriage, Josh? Is that why?
I mean, maybe, but even if it was, like, they're still good actors. It's not like they can't pretend to have that in this film. It's not like they couldn't act in other contexts with people that they were not married to and didn't have attractions to and make it convincing.
Which sex scene was the most believable to you? Was it Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in the mirror, or was it Nicole Kidman and the military guy in the flashback, dream sequences?
None of them. That's what I'm saying. None of it. And not just the sex, like the conversations in this movie are so weirdly stilted and the language choices are so oddly formal. And I don't know, maybe some of those are taken from the novel, although of course the novel's not written in English, so you can translate it in any number of ways. But I mean, I don't know. One thing, there's more, but one thing that stuck out to me, I know at one point, like Nicole Kidman, she's describing this fantasy about the the military officer that she had and how she would have given up her whole life for him if he'd wanted. And she says, at the same time, you were dearer to me than ever. Like, who uses the word dearer? Like, no one ever.
So it's interesting. I didn't even think about that because I was thinking of the emotion behind that. Like, and I get that she's like, hey, I'm willing to throw away all this. Oh, but look at what I have, right? So I get the sentiment behind it. So it's funny because you're looking at it from the wordsmith angle. You're a writer, a critic, and
Well, you're
I'm
also
looking
a
at
writer.
it. Yeah, I know, but I think I read that. I watched that more as an actor than a writer. Is why we took two different angles on that.
Maybe, but I mean, I think my point is not just about the writing like that. My point is that I wasn't engaged with the emotions, that if I had been, that would have tripped me up less. I mean, and I enjoy plenty of movies that have mannered styles of dialogue or acting, but I feel like this is not the place for that, maybe. And I just felt like both of those performances, I mean, not just that all of the performances, which is why I would lay it at Kubrick rather than at any of the specific actors, are so stilted and so mannered that there's no emotion to this film. There's no passion going on here. It's all just a lot of weirdly formalized rituals, as Gleiberman points out.
Yeah, I mean, I keep, look, he's always playing with form and everything. Everything like we said is premeditated with him, right? He has a vision, and this is what he wanted with it. Like all that stuff that you're saying, it didn't bother me at all. And I think it's getting to whatever point he's trying to make, but I can understand why that would bother you because you hate legends.
Sure, I do. So this was a big deal in 1999. I definitely saw it in the theater. I don't know that I knew a whole lot about Kubrick. I was trying to think this. I'm sure I had seen like The Shining, and I definitely saw 2001 because I remember watching that in high school on a tiny little TV at a friend's house and being completely baffled by it. And I may have seen Dr. Strangelove too, but it's not like I was this devoted Kubrick fan. I think it was part of all the hype. And I went to see it in the theater, and I don't recall having a particularly strong response either way. So did you see it at that time, Jason?
Yeah, Josh, by the way, good move watching 2001 on a tiny little TV. That's just as Kubrick would have wanted. So.
Well, hey, man, that's how we watched movies in the VHS era, right? I went over, you remember our friend Aaron Vaughn? I went over to his house and it was like, hey, let's watch 2001. Okay, we did.
Yeah, maybe next time you can watch it on your phone.
I've seen it in a theater and I didn't like it anymore. Just FYI.
So I was obviously aware, film nerd, but I wasn't into Kubrick at the time. I think I might have seen Full Metal Jacket before this. That would have been the only one really that I would have seen.
Yeah, I think I had seen that as well.
But maybe this was my first Kubrick movie. I saw it in the theater. At the time, I was like, I liked it more this time.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen it since the theatrical. Since I saw it in the theater.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't either until I watched it a couple years ago for another podcast. But at that point, I hadn't seen it since the theater. So it had been a long time and didn't much care for it at that point or now. So, Dave, did you see this when it was released?
I actually didn't. This is my first time seeing it. I had always wanted to, and it just always kept slipping away. And, just to kind of go back to your cinema score discussion, I remember this movie, the conversation around it was all of the tabloid stuff. And I think all those people, and myself included, were like, oh, this is like some vanity project from these married actors. And I was just like, I don't need to watch that. Even though I knew of Stanley Kubrick, although I don't know which movies of his I had seen yet at that point. But it just seemed like kind of a puff piece vanity thing. So
yeah, nothing's more about vanity than shooting for 46 weeks straight. I'm sure they were really thrilled about it.
I don't think I knew those details, but
yeah, I mean, I feel like those were part of the tabloid reporting too.
Right.
The sort of grueling nature of the shoot. But yeah, like you thought of it as it was that Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie movie By the Sea or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Something like
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, well, that was where they met, but By the Sea was where that was the vanity project, right?
Yeah.
They were married and she directed it, and it was all about them just sort of like lounging in some vacation. I saw that movie and I don't really remember much about it.
Yeah.
But Jason, anything else you want to mention about the background of this film?
Tom Cruise got an ulcer from all of the stress of this movie and decided not to tell Stanley Kubrick that he had an ulcer. So, he's dedicated, that guy, Josh.
He is, in a weird way. Somehow he managed to find a way to physically damage himself just by making this movie rather than by, jumping out of buildings or whatever. So
Do you
good
think
job.
it was from all the walking in that take?
Yeah, right. Exactly. All the opening and closing of the door. Very different.
Yeah. So Kubrick originally wanted this to be his follow-up to 2001 and, took decades to get there.
Right. This is like his Megalopolis or whatever, or something he'd been trying to make for all this time and made at the end of his career. But better than Megalopolis.
Probably. A compliment. Fair. Yeah, I agree.
I'll give it that. It's better than Megalopolis.
It's funny that you bring that up. I feel like I've said that a lot in this episode, but because this is what I'm thinking. Like, I didn't like Megalopolis, right? But the thing with Kubrick and going back to the cinema score is like, how many times, and this is our fourth time covering Kubrick. He's the new Rob Reiner of Awesome Movie Year. But like, how many times when researching Kubrick have you come up with like, when upon release, the critics didn't like it or it didn't connect with audiences. And then 10 years later, it's reassessed as, we did this with The Shining, right? So, one wonders with Megalopolis, which I, again, did not like, if 10 years from now, after America's downfall in the next 4 years, if we're going to reassess that.
I mean, maybe. I feel like already there are people that, it has its defenders of people who are like, this is a masterpiece or whatever.
Josh, I have one question for you. If you've already given the password to get into the party, why would there be another password to join the party?
Yeah, well, Bill, despite being a doctor, as he's reminding us many, 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 many times, not the brightest guy, I think, really. So not surprising that he screwed that up. We'll come back in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on Eyes Wide Shut. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special Christmas episode of our retrospective season, we're looking back to 1999 and talking about Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. And I was just mentioning how often Tom Cruise's character Bill asserts his status as a doctor. One of the things I wondered in this movie, what kind of doctor is Bill? Like, he's treating kids, he's treating all sorts of different kinds of people. He makes house calls, he treats various ailments. And the only time he seems to not be the right guy for it or whatever is when the costume shop owner asks him why he's losing his hair. And he's like, oh, that's not my field. But otherwise, he's just an all-purpose doctor.
He's a general practitioner for the rich, is what I think. And then obviously with the hair, I just don't think that he didn't want to answer. He wanted to get his costume and find out what the party was. So that sequence is one of my favorite sequences when he goes to the costume shop, because that is as weird as I wanted everything to be, right? Like the reveals in there that his daughter, played by Lily Sobieski, his young daughter, hopefully 18, we'll say, maybe, so
I don't know.
Debatable.
About that.
Yeah. Probably. She's probably
Lily Sobieski was probably 18, but
she
character,
was. Yeah. She's sleeping with foreign businessmen, and then eventually, he's angry at her, and then he just like works out a deal with the businessmen, and it's a very dark, strange turn that the movie takes, and I liked that, and I wanted more dark, strange turns.
Right. I mean, everywhere that Bill goes, even outside of the big secret orgy, people are sexually propositioning him, or they're engaged in these kind of weird sexual practices, right? The costume shop owner has nothing to do with this like secret society and these rituals or whatever. He's just some guy that Bill wakes up in the middle of the night so he can get a costume. But even then, there's the daughter not only engaged in sex with these businessmen, but clearly some sort of like kinky scenario where they're wearing wigs and little underwear, and who knows what's even going on there, right? And I mean, and that's the same for everywhere he goes, right? He's just walking down the street and this prostitute propositions him and takes him back to her apartment. Later on, after the party, right, he's trying to find out what's going on, and he goes to the hotel where Nick Nightingale, his old friend and the piano player, had been staying, and he's trying to get information from the clerk played by Alan Cumming, who is clearly trying to come on to him, right? Every encounter, and I think that's part of the theme and maybe the humor of this, is that Bill is constantly in these situations where he could like cheat on his wife and have sex, and he never ever does, right?
He almost does. He almost does.
But
he
he always is either thwarted or backs off at the last minute. That if he really wanted to cheat on her, he had multiple opportunities to do so, but he just sort of shoots himself in the foot over and over and over again.
Yes, I would agree that affluent people who look like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman could cheat on anybody at any point in time throughout any day of any year.
But it's not just that. It's like he's literally there with a person and he finds some reason to not do it.
Yeah, I mean, the one with the strangest one of that is when he goes back to see Domino, the prostitute, and then her roommate just lets him in, and they're like kind of, flirty, touching each other and everything. And she's like, "Hey, I should tell you, Domino has AIDS as of this morning." And then that kind of kills the vibe, which, today would be a different story because, AIDS.
I mean, it's still bad. You still don't want that.
No, I don't want AIDS, but I've seen the commercials. You can go antiquing on the weekends now with AIDS.
Yeah. But I mean, of course, she also tells him that because she assumes he had sex with Domino, which he did not. Right? So he is not at risk of getting HIV from her.
But that was my point. Like, why did she let it get to that level before she brought it up? Like if she's like, "Hey, I know this dude had sex with my HIV positive roommate," like, why is she going as far as she does before she like brings that up?
I mean, as far as she does is he just kind of like unbuttons her outer shirt or whatever. And it seems like she doesn't expect that. And it's kind of like happening in the moment. And she's like, "Oh, wait a minute." So I understood. I mean, she's not getting AIDS from him, like putting his hand over her clothes.
No, but Ronald Reagan might have thought you could get it that way in the 80s.
Right. Well, thankfully, Ronald Reagan was no longer president in 1999.
That is thankful. So
yes.
So Josh, the orgy sequence is the big set piece of this thing and the most famous aspect of the film. Do you think it holds up in all those regards or what?
Well, like I said, I overall am not really into this movie. And I find most of it tedious. And I think the orgy scene is also tedious. And that's part of, I think, going back to that cinema score thing, that people who went to see this movie for the titillation were disappointed. And I'm fine with it not being arousing or sexy or whatever. I think that's not a problem. My issue with it is that it's dull. And like in that orgy scene, you have this ritual, right, where all the women are kind of in a circle and there's this chanting and you've got the main guy with his staff and he keeps pounding it on the ground. And we spend all this time, he goes around to each woman and he pounds the staff and they get up and they do the fake little kiss. And it's just so plodding. And I feel like that's a lot of what's going on here. And I know that that's kind of the point, right? That Bill is trying to plunge himself into this depravity and he can't. And it turns out that depravity is actually really boring. And I understand that, but I still was bored. We got to that scene, or that scene ended. And the orgy scene, which is really not as much of the movie as you would think based on the hype around it. And I was like, how is there another hour of this movie? And I just saw it not that long ago. And I couldn't remember, like, what the hell is Bill going to do for another hour?
Well, the thing with the orgy scene, and you keep bringing up rituals and the formal nature of it. And we mentioned Barry Lyndon. I think that's a good comparison in that, like, that whole society, everything was formalized and ritualistic. And the dances might be, a counterpart to this orgy. And the orgy to me is what it is. In the research, the thing I found most interesting is that the mysterious woman who tells him to leave, played by Abigail Good, she couldn't do the accent. So they had Cate Blanchett do the voiceover work afterwards. And I didn't know that until researching it now. So, I mean, the orgy to me, like I said, I think it's a lot of hype for something now that like I said, it's going to be Friendsgiving tonight. I'm going to one tonight, baby.
Okay, sure, do that. But no, I mean, I think your comparison with Barry Lyndon is interesting there because, of course, Barry Lyndon is all about this guy who is obsessed with becoming part of the aristocracy, right? And he wants to participate in all of these rituals because he wants to be like them. And I think in a way, that's what Bill is too. right?
Right.
He as rich as Bill is, right? We see like the apartment that he lives in is got to be hugely expensive for New York City. He mentions at one point that it's on Central Park West, right? He makes a lot of money as a doctor, but at the same time, he's still on the outside looking in compared to like Sidney Pollack's character. We don't know what he does, but that guy is clearly ultra wealthy.
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, right, he wants to participate in that sex ritual, which is much like the dances or whatever in Barry Lyndon. And like Barry Lyndon, he just kind of gets kicked to the curb.
Well, and Barry Lyndon's downfall was his sexual appetite, whereas Bill maybe kind of quells that a little bit and is able to save his marriage at the end there.
Right. I mean, you could read the ending as Bill finally understanding his place in the hierarchy, right? He doesn't get to be Sidney Pollack going to sex parties and making hookers disappear. He's the guy who's married to Nicole Kidman and has a kid and is a doctor, and he embraces that at the end.
You know what one thing that really works for me though is the motivation of that big scene, you know, kind of at the beginning where they're getting high and she's explaining how she would have thrown everything away, like to just bang this dude who she's very physically attracted to and knows nothing else about. Like that is shattering for a guy, you know, Bill's confident, right? He's in, like you said, a good, secure situation. And I could see how that would turn your whole world upside down if your wife was like, I saw this dude when we were on vacation and I don't care that you and I have a kid and that we're in a happy marriage. I would have fucked him and thrown everything away.
I guess, but to me, that's not even really what she's saying, because at the same time, right, she says, you were also dearer to me than ever. And I think her point is just like, she thought that. She had a fantasy of that. And what she's doing in that scenario is trying to push back on his assertion that, oh, women aren't like this, right? Women don't have these sexual appetites. And she's like, oh, but wait, let me tell you about this. And that's why, to me, the whole thing, I mean, again, maybe it's the point that Bill is so insecure that this extremely, to me, mild thing that his wife is telling him sends him into this tailspin. But the idea
is it you're saying it's a mild thing, man. I mean,
yes.
You know, you and I are both single. Dave, if your wife said, hey, when we were up in Utah, I would have thrown everything away to bang this dude and we wouldn't have had these cats and dogs together and I would have just thrown our whole marriage away. Wouldn't that like shake you to the core?
I'd probably go to the movies or something just to, you know.
Wash it off. You wouldn't go to like an orgy party in the middle of Utah or anything.
That sounds exhausting. So no.
Yeah. Poor Dave to put him in that position. And
I mean, I'm not trying to go exact, but I mean, you and I are long-term single guys, and Dave is married for a long time, so I think he would have a different perspective than you and I might. That's what I'm really trying to get to.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, just to kind of chime in based off of that, though, the reason I love this movie so much, I think this is definitely the kind of movie you could read in many different ways, what, you know, is being intended here. But to me, it's that she is smart enough to understand to take those temptations and put them back into the marriage. And he is this idiot who's out looking for all this stuff, from simple affairs to an entire ridiculous over-the-top sex orgy club, you know, and not going through with any of it because he's really just not cut out for any of that kind of stuff. But by the end, he's kind of figuring it out that, you know, he needs to kind of focus in on his wife. Like that's what I got out of this movie. And that's why I just thought it was fantastic.
Josh, I do agree with you, though, that it's not just about sex. It's about power and getting to this climb to this upper echelon. Like, when he's talking to Nick Nightingale, right? And Nick Nightingale's telling about the party and he's like, oh, and there are all these women. And, you know, that's a key provocation for him, but also the idea that it's a private party and they pay him so well and it's a secret world of just the most elite. I think that turns him on as much as the sexual aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I mean, and Dave, I think you're right that the point of this movie, you know, in a way, is that Bill is a dumb guy. That Bill is incapable of accepting that his wife has had sexual fantasies, and he's also incapable of accepting that he's not the equal to Sidney Pollack's character, right? Yeah. From a sexual standpoint, we don't find out. In fact, no, we do. We see at the beginning of the movie Sidney Pollack's wife, right? So this guy is obviously, he's married, but he's free to go off and go to orgies and have hookers at the party where his wife also is, and it's no big deal. But also he's presumably powerful enough to do all sorts of other things that Bill is not powerful enough to do. And I just didn't care about Bill and his bumbling through all this bullshit. And the bullshit itself, it goes on for so long, and there's so much of it. It's a very, very, very long movie. That
it's 2.5 hours, man. Come on.
It's nearly 2. It's like 2 hours and 40 minutes. But no, I mean, it's longer than I wanted it to be, is the point.
Yeah. But again, it's dream world, dream sequence, right? So like, it's moving from this to that in, kind of a dreamlike way, so for me and Dave, it worked. For you, I get that it didn't. But I do I think the casting is key here, because you have a very good looking guy with a beautiful wife, and he's rich, and he's got a kid. He's got the whole world, right? And he, again, she says, I was willing to throw it all away, but he's the one who almost throws it all away, right? So I think casting a beautiful married couple is really smart move here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that's the point, that she doesn't throw anything away, right? She's there in the marriage. And while he's out wandering around, bumbling through these situations, she's just sitting at home, drinking milk and
making
TV.
breakfast for the kid and
helping with homework,
whatever else it is, right?
Yeah.
So,
he's not a very good father, it seems like. He's not really paying a whole lot of attention to
again, he's an idiot. I mean, the whole thing takes place 2 or 3 days, right? So we don't have the crux beyond that motivation there. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot, as always with a Kubrick movie, there's so many different aspects to unpack, and how does it relate to the other themes of stuff that he's done, and, dreams and kind of the real world versus what we don't know as a real world, but is a real world for him. They're all in there, right? Characters in Clockwork Orange live in this crazy dream space world too, but that's their real world.
Right. And I think as much as you could maybe interpret that certain aspects of this are a dream, it's not presented that way in the movie. And so to me, as a viewer, giving it the leeway of this is a dream, I don't give it that leeway. And I think that scene with Sidney Pollack where he has to explain everything which is not from the novel, because that character is not in the novel, is the moment where Kubrick is like, no, this isn't a dream. Whether it's a hoax, as he says, or not, something really happened. And this guy is here to tell you, to validate the fact that all of this really happened.
I love that scene. And I think that just kind of goes to show he's never going to get to the bottom of any of this. No matter how hard he tries, even if he didn't give up and go to his wife and live a happy, married life or whatever, he's never going to learn anything about anything.
But at the same time, there is something that could be learned.
Sure, but he's not going to know.
But it's real and it's there.
Yeah.
Right. I agree with you. It's not a dream. I don't love that scene. And I love that you love that scene and that we're talking about it. To me, it's just exposition to kind of shine the lantern on something we already knew. So to me, that scene doesn't really work. And maybe it would have worked if it was less on the nose of hey, we did this just to fool you, and that type of thing. And that to me didn't work at all.
Yeah. I mean, I would have gone with it more maybe if it was more surreal. But I think despite making movies like 2001 that are kind of surreal, I think Kubrick isn't the surrealism guy, really, that he is this cold, calculating kind of filmmaker, and that he's not David Lynch, right? I would have and I haven't seen Mulholland Drive in a long time, but I much prefer Silencio over Fidelio, right? I much prefer Mulholland Drive and David Lynch, because Lynch is just here's some weird shit, deal with it. And Kubrick is wait, no, we got to get Sidney Pollack to tell you what's going on.
No, but I'm going to disagree with you. I think, again, that beat doesn't work. But if we're looking at Clockwork Orange and we're looking at 2001, and The Shining, he does play in those. It's a different type of surrealism than Lynch, but it's still playing in that world,
I guess.
Yeah, and also I don't think he does explain it away. Even if it is, a big monologue, I don't think he explains anything. He just, makes the threads go further.
Right, hey, let this go. That's the kind of
right. But I think what he does explain, again, is that there is something to explain, right? He's telling you, this is all real. This all really happened, and there's a reason for it. And maybe Bill's never going to know what the reason really is. but there is a reason. Whereas in Lynch, maybe there isn't a reason, but Lynch doesn't care whether there's a reason, and he doesn't want you to care whether there's a reason. You're just sort of along for the ride of it. And I was not along for the ride in this film, really.
You mentioned that, we're shooting this at Pinewood Studios, as Kubrick does, and there are some scenes in the New York exteriors that were shot in New York that they mapped in the background. But I thought they did a good job of, I never thought I'm on a studio set. I thought this is New York.
Yeah, I mean, and you've been to New York more, I think, than either of us have, but yes and no. There are scenes, and I think Lieberman points this out in his review too. The one scene where Bill is being followed by some guy in like a trench coat, and suddenly there's no one on the street, and I'm sure that's on purpose because it's meant to be, surreal or whatever. But at that moment, when you remove all the extras, it's clearly a set.
Yeah, I mean, and it looks, in that essence, it does look like a set, but I think that also works based on the themes that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely on purpose. But I think if Kubrick was so concerned with that realism of it and supposedly getting all the exact measurements of,
right,
sidewalks,
he measured the streets and
right, and all that. If he was so concerned with that, then why is he then pointing out the artificiality of it in that one moment? And I just am not sure that that's what's meant to be. That's what you're meant to take away from that
moment. Were there any of the supporting performances? Obviously Sidney Pollack's the biggest one, and he's a legend as a director and a very capable actor, obviously. Did any of to me, the big supporting performance was, I said, our guy, the shop owner there.
Wade Sherbedgia, however you pronounce his name.
Who we talked about in Mission Impossible too.
Yes, and who I think we said at the time that we both remember as a villain from 24, but is in tons of things. So yeah, I mean, he's fun because he's the kind of, you don't expect him to be so weird, right? He's just a shop owner that's been bothered in the middle of the night, and yet he is very strange, and he's suddenly a pimp for his daughter or whatever. So he's fun. I thought Alan Cumming was fun because again, you don't expect you expect that just to be a part that it's exposition. It's just here, Bill's going to go get some information. But Alan Cumming is playing that moment so sexually, and I'm sure I was directed to do that it's just amusing. You're like, what is happening here? So that was entertaining.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Todd Field, we know, is, now more of as a director. I thought he did a good job as Nick Nightingale. And the Marie Richardson character, which I do want to talk about that scene. I thought that was, she gave a good performance, although I don't think that scene reached the height that it should have. And the last one I want to mention, because we talked about Leon Vitali, his assistant / young Barry Lyndon in Barry Lyndon, or whatever his name was. It was good that he was back as the head of the orgy, Fidelio.
Right. Oh, he was like Barry Lyndon Jr. or Barry Lyndon's, was it his son or his stepson?
It was his stepson, yeah. The stepson. And then he became Kubrick's assistant for 30 years.
Right. And he's credited as assistant to the director or something like that. So, yeah, I don't know what you want to say about that scene where, I mean, the excuse that Bill first has to leave the house is that one of his patients has died. And that was another moment I was like, what the hell is Bill's role here, right? Because the guy's dead. He doesn't have to treat him. He doesn't have to pronounce him dead. There's no sense of is somebody coming to take away this corpse? Bill is not doing anything useful here at all, but he determines that it's essential for him to leave and go over to the house. And this woman, the daughter of the dead man, kind of professes her love for him randomly and tries to make out with him, and he declines. And that's, maybe one of the earlier moments of him being thwarted from having an affair. And then later on, he tries to call her and is thwarted then because her fiance, played by Thomas Gibson, answers the phone instead. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I to me, so much of this just is baffling and doesn't really work, but I'm with you on that.
I was kind of bummed out in that scene. One, because it's literally just recasting the scene we just saw where Nicole Kidman's like, I would throw it all away for you. And now we see a woman who's like, Willie, she's like, I just want to be near you, even if you don't, know who I am or care about me. to me, I really enjoyed the beginning of that scene in the same way that you were talking about the Alan Cummings stuff, where like you could tell she's relishing him, like, oh, I have to move soon and this and that. And like she's coming on to him so subtly. And I thought like the subtext was so much better than the text, right? Like I love that part of it. And I love the end where she's trying to get a word out and he's just like, okay, gotta go. Have a happy holiday, right? And I thought had you edited that down, that was a more effective scene to me emotionally. And then it kind of, at the end, I felt the same thing because we have this idea, we know the mask is missing, right? His sex party mask. And we figure that Nicole Kidman took it, right? And he even figures that. But then we see the mask on the bed with Nicole Kidman before he sees it. And I felt like, man, if he just walked into that room and we saw the mask at the same time he did, it would have been a much more effective, like emotional punch when he breaks down because we're experiencing as he is, as opposed to, ooh, we know he's about to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that, but also I guess I misconstrued why the mask was there because I kind of thought that the reason that it was there was that the secret society had grabbed it when he left it at the party and they put it there to kind of remind him like, hey, we're watching you. We know where you live. We know about your family. Don't fuck with us. And I mean, I think your interpretation makes sense, especially because at that moment, right, when he sees it, he does break down and he's like, I'll tell you everything because maybe he thinks that, oh, she must have figured out that something was going on. But that, yeah, I interpreted it differently.
Right. Well, that's fine. I think either way you interpret it, not showing it before he sees it would have been a more effective maneuver there.
Right.
So, I'm qualified to tell Stanley Kubrick how to fix his
how to
films,
edit his
Josh.
film. Well, I mean, right, there is the dispute over whether he was truly finished editing this film or not. And so maybe he would have made that change if he had had a little more time to work on the film. You never know.
And we should talk about that in our legacy section, but we should rate this thing first out of 5 Fidelios, Josh.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to give it 2.5 Fidelios. It's just, I mean, I respect Stanley Kubrick and the ambition here. It does not work for me. So, Jason?
I give it 3.5 Fidelios. It does work for me, but there are issues I had with it, and including the cinematography, who he picked like his longtime gaffer. And I just feel like it's not as momentous and effective as something like The Shining, which is also shot in a lot of enclosed areas and really elevates the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach to The Shining with all that Steadicam stuff is just different. And here, as I was saying earlier, using the Christmas lights in the same way that he uses candlelight in Barry Lyndon, I did love the way that they sort of are bright and overwhelming in a way in some scenes, or they just give every scene this kind of glow that I liked, and that adds maybe to the dreamlike feel. So, I mean, one thing that I didn't have a problem with here was the cinematography.
Well, I mean, I agree with you on the lighting aspect. I just think that the camera could have been used in a more efficient manner. Not that there was anything wrong with it. We've just seen him elevate pieces with camera work.
I guess, but I mean, I think that he's approaching each movie the way that he thinks is best to tell the story or whatever. And The Shining is specifically done that way with all the Steadicam and the roving camera. And this is not. So I didn't have an issue with that. So
you give it 3.5 now too.
No. I mean, I had many other issues, so that's still my rating. But Dave, how do you rate this?
I'm going to 5 for this one, guys.
Wow.
Yeah, no, this blew me away. I loved it. And yeah, it's great.
All right. Well, we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Eyes Wide Shut. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our retrospective season, we are celebrating Christmas with Stanley Kubrick's 1999 film, Eyes Wide Shut. And we have talked about Kubrick many times. This is our 4th Kubrick episode after Barry Lyndon and The Shining and Fear and Desire. And I mean, there's no legacy here for Kubrick because, of course, he was not around. But at least his vision, whatever it might be, like in terms of the sex scenes, was eventually released. You can watch the uncut version of this on home video. And I do think that its reputation has improved over time.
It definitely has. But Josh, what I want to get to is the idea of was the movie done? Because the reports that I read said that Kubrick said it was his greatest contribution to the art of cinema. And then I read this quote from Arlie Ermy, who, his whole career was made from Full Metal Jacket, where he said Kubrick called him and he said, he told me it was a piece of shit and that he was disgusted with it and that the critics were going to have him for lunch. He said Cruise and Kidman had their way with him. Exactly the words he used. But then Todd Field said, you've never seen two actors more completely subservient and prostrate themselves at the feet of a director. Stanley was absolutely thrilled with the film. He was still working on the film when he died, and he probably died because he finally relaxed. It was one of the happiest weekends of his life right before he died, after he'd shown the first cut to Terry Simmel from Warner Brothers, Tom and Nicole. And he went on to say that Kubrick did not like Arlie Ermy and told him not to work with him.
Right, exactly. It is like Arlie Ermy, a trustable source or whatever. And even if he was really happy with that cut, that doesn't mean that he might not have further tinkered with it for various reasons.
Yeah, we go back to Coppola again. Those guys are always playing with their movies. So,
right, exactly. So who knows? But I think it's fair to say that this is as close as possible to his vision, given that he wasn't around to fully finish it. And I think that's fair. And I think this is accepted. There's certain works, I think, from some directors where they weren't able to fully participate, and we accept that this is like not really, Orson Welles, for example, there's tons of his films where he didn't finish properly or whatever, and it's always with an asterisk. But I don't think people feel that way about this movie with Kubrick.
Yeah, I think it's, like you said, as close to done as possible. You mentioned that Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger were in the running for this. We talked about how Harvey Keitel originally had the Ziegler part, the Sidney Pollack part, and Jennifer Jason Leigh was supposed to be that character who comes on to him, which would have been really interesting, I think. But they both had to leave for other commitments. But what I thought was interesting was that originally he wanted it to be a sex comedy. This is like the original incarnation, the 70s or whatever, late 60s, with a wild and somber streak running through it, starring Steve Martin or Woody Allen in the main role.
Yeah, I can't imagine Stanley Kubrick making an effective wacky sex comedy. I mean, he can do comedy, I guess, when
he can
Strangelove.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's very like dry satirical comedy. I don't know that this is really
right.
As much as I wasn't crazy about this movie, I think he went with the right approach for himself if he's going to make this story.
In the 80s, where I think it was still more of a comedy piece, the names he considered were Tom Hanks, Bill Murray, Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, Albert Brooks, Alan Alda, and Sam Shepard. And honestly, I think all of those would have been an interesting movie to watch as the lead.
Yeah, I mean, and I think all of those people could have interpreted in the dramatic way that Cruise does here. So it wouldn't have to be a comedy in order to star those people.
Right. It would have been a little more humorous, if nothing else.
Yeah. Play up the sort of bumbling aspect of that Bill character, I guess, could have been something. I don't know. We've talked about Cruise a bunch of times as well. A Few Good Men and Mission Impossible 2. And as we were saying earlier, I mean, his career now and for the past 15 years probably has just been so laser focused on these huge blockbuster action spectacles. And he doesn't do dramatic roles like this, but he is working on a movie now with Alejandro González Iñárritu, which I assume is a more serious dramatic role given the films that guy has made. So I do not like him at all, but I'm curious to see what Cruise does in a film like that. It's called Judy, coming up like next year, maybe.
Yeah, none of us know what it's going to be. We know Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, renamed for more money, is coming out. He's got the SpaceX movie and possibly a Live, Die, Repeat movie. And then, of course, he's teamed with Christopher McQuarrie on everything now. And McQuarrie's supposed to direct him in 2 movies coming up. The Gauntlet, a detective must transport a witness to testify against a mobster, but betrayed by corrupt cops, they hijack a bus and reinforce it, attempting to reach the court while being pursued by armed officers. That sounds like a real fun Tom Cruise action movie. It's got Scarlett Johansson also attached. And then Broadsword, a Marine sergeant crash lands in World War II France, the only survivor on his mission. He teams up with a brave local girl as they journey across dangerous landscapes, dodging enemies in a desperate bid to reach Allied territory.
Yeah, I mean, I am so bored with those Mission Impossible movies. I'm not really interested in his further collaborations with Christopher McQuarrie or more big action things where he plays characters who have no like emotional depth to them. So as much as I dislike Iñárritu, I'm more interested in that film, I think.
I mean, The Gauntlet sounds like it might be, in the line of like a Collateral contained, action piece, which, that could be fun.
I guess. I think honestly, at this point, the fact that McQuarrie is doing those films is what puts me off, rather than if it was a different filmmaker that he was going to work with. But we'll see.
Nicole Kidman, we said, has an Academy Award, a BAFTA, 2 Emmys, 6 Golden Globes. She's the queen of a limited series right now. We both really loved the first series of Big Little Lies. I didn't watch season 2, but 9 Perfect Strangers, Lioness. She's killing these things. And the next interesting movie, the next limited series that I marked down that sounds interesting for her, Margot's Got Money Problems, which is based on a book. It also stars Elle Fanning and Michelle Pfeiffer. A young mother finds herself struggling to make ends meet. When her estranged father offers help, she starts an OnlyFans account using his advice from pro wrestling. Though successful, she wonders if internet fame comes at too high a cost.
Yeah, the fact that it has pro wrestling in it, I'm sure is what drew you to it. But
no, it's not what drew me to it. But that was like detail number 7 of it.
Right. So. No. That does sound interesting. And she is in. I've seen most of those. I have seen the second season of Big Little Lies and The Undoing and Expats and The Perfect Couple. And, the quality on that stuff is mixed. But she's always playing, I think, as I was saying before, she's always playing a character with layers and depth, even if the show itself is not great, as opposed to Cruise, who seems like he's really just focused on like, look at what crazy action thing I can do. I think she is such a good actor. I mean, you mentioned that period of time and, around in the next few years, she did stuff like Dogville and Birth, which I think is so good, the Jonathan Glazer film. She was in The Northman more recently, very good in that. And this year, probably around the time that this episode is coming out, Baby Girl, which I'm really excited to see. So I just find her so much more interesting as an actor than Cruise at this point.
I mean, that's because of the risks that she's taking for sure. Baby Girl might get her an Academy Award nomination. Josh, what did you think of her in Bewitched? The movie
That's
Bewitched.
Not my favorite. I love the Bewitched TV series. I remember being intrigued by that, and it was a big disappointment.
But what about her in Aquaman?
I mean, she's fine, and I know Dave has a weird. You love Aquaman, right, Dave? For some reason,
she's so good in that movie.
Let's just keep her in The Northman. That's a great scene where she tells Skarsgård how she really feels about him. We'll leave that to the audience if they haven't seen it. Sidney Pollack, legendary director, 2 Academy Awards, Best Picture and Director for Out of Africa. He's got an Emmy. We've mentioned They Shoot Horses, Don't They, a lot, but she was also nominated for Best Director. The Way We Work, 3 Days of the Condor, Tootsie, The Firm, Sabrina, and, we've seen him act in another movie we covered, The Player. He was in Husbands and Wives, Michael Clayton, all-time legend, Sidney Pollack.
Yeah, and he's directed both Cruise and Kidman. He directed Tom Cruise in The Firm and directed Nicole Kidman in The Interpreter. And, after this, he did more like acting after this. I think he only directed a handful of more movies, but was appeared in small roles in various films through 2008 when he passed away. So, I mean, I think you watch this and you don't think of him as a great actor. And obviously he was a replacement for Harvey Keitel, but he does a really good job with that part. He does exactly what it needs to be.
I think he does a good job. I already said Todd Field, another actor, director, does a good job. One of our more interesting filmmakers around. Who knows what's coming next for him after In the Bedroom, Little Children, and Tar. Going from being like a kid actor and then, being in like Twister and stuff like that to and walking and talking to the movies he's making. He's one of the more interesting filmmakers out there.
Yeah, and he's had such a amazing life. I mean, as a filmmaker, right? Kubrick was a mentor for him. So, working on this movie was obviously a key point in his evolution from actor to filmmaker. The thing I love about Todd Field is that even before any of that, he co-invented Big League Chew. And, how that's enough for any life, right? To have invented one of the great candies of all time. And then also to have a career as an actor and then to have a career as this acclaimed filmmaker. I mean, come on, Todd Field, give somebody else a chance.
Yeah, I think Big League Chew is terrible though.
But it's certainly popular and well known.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's that, but it's got that chalky, remember bubble tape, that chalkiness. Yeah, I hate that.
So
texture.
Good too. Amazing.
Oh, you're an insane person, but that's okay. We love Todd Field. Also giving a huge contribution to cinema, Vanessa Shaw, who played Domino, as the love interest in Hocus Pocus, Josh.
Oh, that is important. The last legacy thing I wanted to mention is that warning note that he gets, like, please cease all your inquiries, which are useless. I is like a meme that people will post related to like shut up about something or whatever. And during the period before, like, I hadn't seen this until a couple years ago, hadn't seen it again. I definitely remember seeing that and like, what is it? This is from a movie. I've seen this movie and having to look it up multiple times.
Well, I don't know if Fidelio is a meme, but that's still in the popular culture. And then Nicole Kidman is memed constantly as like the AMC lady at this point in time.
Well, right, but not from this movie per se. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we should mention Alan Cumming, which hopefully we could get more into, but he's got a BAFTA, 2 Emmys, 2 Tonys, and an Olivier Award. He's killing it as the host of The Traitors right now, but done plenty of great movies. I know you love him in Romy and Michelle.
Oh yeah, yes, and Josie and the Pussycats as well. And this is an early role for him, but you can see, I mean, he's a kind of a scene stealer here, right? He
definitely steals the scene.
Yeah. That he would be, go on to great things. So
Lily Sobieski was a great young actress who retired. Has done a lot of different types of movies also,
and played Lolita, not in the Kubrick film, but in a different film.
Yeah, there you go, Josh.
So
it was Here on Earth where she played Lolita.
No, wasn't she? I was like, am I wrong about that? Wasn't she in Lolita, the movie Lolita?
Never Been Kissed, where she played Lolita.
Yeah.
That's
Joyride.
That's the opposite. It's Lolita it's the older woman.
She gets kissed a lot. Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about the legacy here, Jason?
Fidelio.
All right. That is Eyes Wide Shut. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can join our sex orgy online and on social media.
You can. Hey, Josh, I feel like we do have to mention Frederick Raphael, who won Best Original Screenplay for Darling and helped write this. So now that we did that, I can go on and give us our social media pushes here, Josh. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Instagram and FB, Awesome Movie Pod on the shitty orgy of filth that is a platform. And you got to get us on Blue Sky already, bro. I'm at Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the things. Eat This Comedy. We're doing work. Come see us. Hi. You go for Jason on Letterboxd.
You can find some old things from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think. And check out our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Breaking It Apart.
Breaking It Apart too. Yeah. Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And if you want to get us a Christmas gift, maybe sign up for our Produced by David Rosen Patreon, which has a new bonus episode from Awesome Movie Year, a bunch of stuff from Piecing It Together, and a bunch of stuff from my music career. It's at patreon.com/bydavidrosen.
Yeah, check that out. We've got our 1969 bonus available there now. And what do we have in our next episode here, Jason?
Talk about a Christmas gift, Josh. Though it's not chronological, we're finally getting to the first episode of Feel the Burns. It's another Christmas episode. It's Ed Burns, Fitzgerald's Family Christmas. It will be the kickoff to Feel the Burns, where we cover every single Ed Burns movie.
It will not, but we will talk about Fitzgerald Family Christmas. Tune in for that. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
You might say that the audience isn't about piecing it together, but Dave is, and
yes.
he could break it apart. If we were breaking apart Mulholland Drive, you could use Eyes Wide Shut as a piece right there.
Yes,
right. Well, this actually came before Mulholland Drive, so
no, it did not. No, it did not. This is 99.
Mulholland Drive from 2001.
Right, this came first. This would be a piece from Mulholland Drive.
Right, so if you were breaking it apart,
if you were breaking apart Mulholland Drive,
we have to understand what Dave's shows are. The breaking it apart.
You're not listening.
You'd be piecing it together, Mulholland Drive, and getting Eyes Wide Shut as a puzzle piece.
You were breaking Mulholland Drive apart, and that's the idea of like what movies did it influence.
Oh, Yeah, no, I don't listen to Dave's podcast.
Yeah,
We can cut all that. We can cut all that.